Few episodes in the history of the Crusades are so tragic as William of Tyre's discovery that his pupil, Prince Baldwin, the future king of Jerusalem, was suffering from leprosy.
In the Middle Ages, leprosy was the ultimate outcast's disease. You were a living ghost, forced to ring a bell to warn the clean. But what if a king had it? King Baldwin IV, ruler of Jerusalem, was that king.
The young king also suffered from a grave illness, leprosy. Despite his disease, and despite the fewness of his men, Baldwin the Leper rode at the head of his knights, sword in hand, battling Saladin's legions on more than one occasion.
He wore a mask not just of silver, but of mystery. He beat the legendary Saladin at only 16, all while his body was falling apart. Many people are crazy about his tragic story, but not all things are what they seem. A brand new discovery just rewrote his entire life, and the world is in shock over what really caused his infamous illness. The boy with a terrible secret. From his first breath, Baldwin's world was one of ritual and brutal instruction. Before he could read, he learned to pray. Before his voice even cracked, he learned to ride a war horse and issue commands to men twice his age. He was a prince being forged for a world that had absolutely no patience for weakness. And yet, as Baldwin grew, something strange and terrible set him apart. His tutor, the famous scholar William of Tyre, was the first to notice. One afternoon, William was watching the young prince playing with other boys from the court. It was rough, as games between future knights always were. During the scuffle, another boy's sharp fingernails raked down Baldwin's forearm. Blood welled up, bright red against his pale skin. The other boys froze, waiting for the scream, but it never came. Baldwin didn't cry. He didn't even flinch. He just looked at the wound with a calm curiosity. William of Tyre felt a chill run down his spine. He quietly began his own tests. He would pinch the prince's arm harder and harder while pretending to talk. Baldwin never reacted. As William later wrote in his famous chronicle, the weight of that moment was heavy. The boy felt nothing when struck or pinched. This wasn't a miracle. It was an omen. The thing nobody tells you about medieval medicine is that they operated on fear and superstition as much as fact. A numb limb wasn't a curiosity, it was a sign. The symptoms began as a faint tingling in one hand, then a creeping numbness in the other. Behind the closed doors of the palace, the royal household knew exactly what this meant. In an age of saints and superstitions, one disease was dreaded above all others. It was considered a divine punishment, a curse from God himself. Leprosy. It was a sentence of isolation, disgrace, and a slow, living demise. The world outside the palace walls remained oblivious, but inside, the fate of a dynasty was being quietly, horribly rewritten. Then, in 1174, King Amalric I died unexpectedly. The succession was swift and solemn. Baldwin was only 13 years old. Think about that for a second. A teenager, barely old enough to shoulder the weight of a crown, was now king of the most volatile kingdom on earth. In the soaring, echoing nave of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, amid the shimmer of golden incense burners and the murmur of Latin prayers, the boy was crowned Baldwin IV, King of Jerusalem. And as he grew into his role, the burden only intensified. Jerusalem was never at peace. It was beset on all sides by enemies, and just as bad, riddled with internal rivalries. The primary threat was a brilliant general who was uniting the Muslim world, Saladin. From Egypt and Syria, Saladin was gathering his forces, forging a massive army unified by the promise of reclaiming Jerusalem. Back inside the city, noble families jostled for power, deeply suspicious of each other and of the child king whose health was quietly unraveling. Baldwin's face, pale and almost angelic, became both an icon and a warning. On public occasions, he wore heavy robes to conceal his wasting limbs. Only his most trusted attendants saw him in moments of weakness. He trained harder than any of his peers, insisting on joining the knights in sword practice, refusing to give up a single scrap of royal dignity. When his hands blistered and bled from the sword's hilt, hands that couldn't feel the damage being done, he simply had them wrapped in linen and rode out to tournaments with a smile. But the gossip in Jerusalem was relentless. The word seeped through the city's narrow, dusty roads. The king is cursed. The king is unclean. In the superstitious world of the Middle Ages, this was more than an illness. It was a sign of divine judgment. Baldwin's suffering was no longer a secret. His pain, or rather his inability to feel it, had become a public mystery. His body was failing, but his will was iron. Saladin was coming, and the boy king would have to perform a miracle. A legend in living decay. The years pressed on, and the mask of normality finally shattered. Baldwin's symptoms advanced with a terrifying, relentless pace. His fingers stiffened into useless claws. His feet began to drag behind him as he walked. His eyes, once sharp, grew clouded and hollow. What began as numbness became paralysis. What started as a secret became a public spectacle. Yet, even as his body failed him, Baldwin's will only grew fiercer. Saladin's threat was no longer distant. It was at the gates. News arrived of cities falling, armies gathering, and the crescent banners pushing ever closer to the holy city. Jerusalem needed a king who could lead in battle, not just in council. Against the advice of every physician and advisor, Baldwin refused to yield command. He trained with his knights, practicing maneuvers until his body gave out and he collapsed. In 1177, the war broke out in full force. Saladin led a massive army, tens of thousands strong, north from Egypt. On the other hand, Baldwin's own forces were pitifully small, a few hundred knights and a few thousand infantry, all facing certain annihilation. His advisors begged him to stay behind the walls, to leave command to healthier men. Baldwin would not listen. On the morning of the battle at Montgisard, his attendants had to physically lift him onto his horse. He was just 16 years old. His hands, now clawed and numb, couldn't grip the reins. His legs couldn't grip the horse. So they bound his legs to the saddle with leather straps so he would not fall. He led the charge. What happened next is the stuff of legends. Against all expectations, the Crusader charge shattered Saladin's lines. The impossible happened. The king, who should have been an invalid, the boy who was strapped to his horse, became a living legend. Saladin himself barely escaped. News of the victory thundered through Christendom. The boy king with leprosy had performed a miracle, but the celebration was fleeting. Behind the public triumph, Baldwin's decline was accelerating. His fingers blackened. Ulcers opened on his limbs. His voice faded. And this is where the veiled king persona was born. By the time Baldwin entered adulthood, his weaknesses were impossible to hide. His features faded beneath the relentless assault of the disease. He began wearing linen veils, not for mystery, but to shield his subjects from the stark reality of his disfigurement. Beneath the cloth, his cheeks hollowed. The proud bridge of his nose eroded and twisted. Where his eyebrows once were, there was only smooth, taut skin. Each appearance stirred a tumult of awe, grief, and fear. Crowds would assemble to witness him, kneeling as he passed, struck by a mixture of reverence and sorrow. You see, leprosy was a living demise. The afflicted were cast out, forced to ring bells to warn others. Baldwin was king. He couldn't be exiled. In a bitter paradox, all of Jerusalem became his leper colony. His mind, however, remained untouched. He governed with a clarity that amazed his court. But even as he ruled, physicians were baffled. The illness didn't match the patterns. It moved too fast, striking nerves in ways they didn't understand. The final, unbelievable test came at the siege of Kerak. Saladin, sensing weakness, surrounded the fortress. By now, Baldwin was blind and nearly paralyzed. He demanded to be carried at the head of the relief army. Eyewitnesses described him on a litter, shrouded in linen, held aloft like a holy relic. When Saladin's army saw this corpse, leading an army, they were so unnerved they broke the siege. He had defied his enemies, but his body was staging a final terrible rebellion. The 800-year-old cold case. As winter deepened in early 1185, the bells of Jerusalem rang out a sorrowful sound. Baldwin IV, the Leper King, was gone. He was only 24 years old. He had ruled for 11 years, each one a pitched battle against not just invaders, but the decay of his own flesh. His last act was one of careful foresight. Knowing his dynasty was fragile, he summoned the court. Blind, paralyzed, and barely able to speak, he dictated the line of succession, naming his young nephew as heir. His final words to be recorded were a plea: "Let my disease die with me." His request went unanswered. His body was sealed in a limestone sarcophagus in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. But over the following centuries, as Jerusalem fell and rose and fell again, his tomb was lost. Wars and renovations destroyed the crypts, and the king's remains vanished. The legend endured, but the truth of his suffering and the mystery of his atypical illness were lost to time. Until now. Fast forward 800 years to the spring of 2024. This is the moment everything changed. Workmen excavating a forgotten crypt near the Church of the Holy Sepulchre uncovered an unmarked limestone sarcophagus. The slab was thick with dust, but faint Latin inscriptions survived. Baldwin Rex, Baldwin the King. It was him. The discovery stunned archaeologists and set off a frenzy. A multidisciplinary team assembled: geneticists, forensic pathologists, medievalists. This was the cold case of a lifetime. Forensic imaging revealed the telltale lesions along the cranial nerves and marked deformities in the extremities. It was all consistent with severe leprosy, but the real breakthrough came from ancient DNA extracted from the bone marrow. Here's the kicker. The initial tests confirmed the presence of Mycobacterium leprae, the bacterium responsible for leprosy. No surprise there. But further analysis revealed genetic signatures that did not fit known medieval strains. The findings upended centuries of speculation. The deeper scientists delved, the more complex the puzzle became. Baldwin's tissue contained traces of a second mutated strain of the pathogen, one that appeared to target nerve sheets directly, attacking the body's wiring rather than just the flesh. This was not traditional leprosy. It was a hybrid neurodegenerative assault. And there was more. Genetic analysis suggested Baldwin carried markers for a rare autoimmune susceptibility. His immune system was prone to a kind of personal civil war. Instead of defending him, his body was waging a two-front battle, attacking the invading bacteria and simultaneously turning on itself. This was a huge discovery, but it still didn't explain everything. One final, shocking piece of the puzzle was missing: the truth about Baldwin IV. This is the diagnosis that left the world in shock. King Baldwin IV had not just suffered from one or even two conditions. The final, definitive analysis proved he had also endured Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease, or CMT. What is CMT? It's a hereditary neuropathy, a genetic disease passed down through his royal bloodline that slowly and inexorably destroys nerve function. Think about that. This disease already made his nerves vulnerable. It was the reason he couldn't feel pain as a boy. It was the reason his muscles began to waste away, forming the claws and dragging feet so often described by William of Tyre. The leprosy bacteria, encountering this profound genetic weakness, didn't just find a host, it found a superhighway. The mutated bacterial infection exploited his genetic vulnerability with ruthless precision. The leprosy plus the CMT plus the autoimmune response created a unique, nightmarish hybrid disease that had never been documented before. This diagnosis, elusive for so long, was a stunning act of historical restoration. The centuries-old debate, curse or coincidence, punishment or pathology, was finally laid to rest. Priests had preached that Baldwin's suffering was the hand of God. Chroniclers wrote of him as a figure veiled in holy mystery. But beneath the awe, the real question had always been what really happened. At last, science answered. Baldwin IV was not cursed. He was born with a rare genetic flaw and struck down by a complex infection. The agony that defined his reign was an extraordinary biological misfortune. The report's conclusion was stark. A medieval pathology specialist remarked, "After centuries of conjecture, the King Baldwin IV mystery illness is finally solved, and the world is in shock at how modern science unraveled what legend could not." So, was Baldwin's greatest battle against Saladin or against his own DNA? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more interesting stories like this. Thanks for watching.